come in costume.
No, but I do have meetings that'll be taking place.
Yes. Well, starting next week, I figure, I have all these Halloween, well, all seasons, all holidays, socks and shirts and stuff that I usually wear in fitness, but I figure, man, it'd be fun to start wearing them here.
Totally is.
Yeah, I'm going to bring some for Shane.
All right.
He's so excited.
I need some fun socks.
We're on air.
All right.
Hello, Lisa. Hey.
So I will call this study session to order and introduce our municipal court judge, Kimberly Graves.
Good evening. The mayor did my introduction, so I'm not going to introduce myself again.
You can do the extraordinary part.
Right? Just add it in. Okay, Kimberly Graves, municipal court judge. It's been a little bit more than a quarterly update, so it's been, I think, about a year almost. But there's a few updates, and you should all have, no, you don't pass them out right now. Double-sided update there. Probably the most interesting and takes up most of the report, of course, is attendance court. I'll go over the other two quickly. There was some question about the lien process. Negotiating liens and negotiating lesser amounts. And Haley and I went back and forth a little bit on that, trying to figure out the process. Since the court orders the judgment, it seems like there's some attachment to the court. I looked into that further, talked to some other judges, looked at the statutes, and I figured out that once the court's ordered the judgment, our part is done. The lien is the city's part, and so the city is free to negotiate those however they wish, and there doesn't need to be any court approval at all. So if that simplifies that process a little bit, that's the answer there. I like that answer because I never had a stake in what the amount was. It was more of a rubber stamp, so it eliminates the rubber stamp portion, which makes sense to me. Paperless court, we are moving that direction, though sort of at a snail's pace. The judgments are now getting entered online as far as communication between court going on upstairs and court going on and the payments going on downstairs. We are still writing them on the tickets. The tickets are still getting printed out, so I think it's baby steps in that process. It'll also be helpful to get all the officers onto e-ticket machines so that we don't have the summer e-tickets, summer handwritten tickets, just to help the process. But I think the next step is getting all of the tickets onto the computer and then entering the judgment on the computer without doing any of the paper stuff, and then sending them off to DMV paperless as well.
How will people, if it's a, well, I guess that's not an issue anymore. I was going to say, if there's not a cop standing there when you get the ticket, in other words, like our van or something like that, they'll still get something in the mail.
Yeah, they'll still get the mailed ticket.
Okay.
It's just that we won't then get a copy mailed to us. It'll just get sent to us electronically.
Okay, sorry.
And I know the DMV has been kind of allowing courts to send in their stuff electronically, but they're also doing that in waves, making sure that they have all the kinks out of the process. So right now, we still actually have to mail them all the paper. So it's not like we're necessarily slowing down any of the process there. We're all kind of moving at a snail's pace. But we're moving, and DMV's moving. So. Attendance court was and has been the most interesting discussion. We had some good wins, in my opinion, as far as getting parenting classes, which was something we talked about last year. I've got two different groups that offer parenting classes, Northwest Family Services, and then also the Clackamas Juvenile Department, and they have been wonderful. They've said they want to offer more classes, they just need more referrals. So they said, send us all your referrals. We will contact them, we will get them into a class, and until they tell us stop contacting me, we'll keep at them. If they tell us stop contacting me, they will then let the court know. So we've got one family actively going to class right now, and I'm super hopeful. It's a family we've seen year after year after year. I don't know that I've ever even seen the student. Mom comes, little sister comes. I don't even think she's gotten the 13-year-old to court, but she's got her to parenting class because we checked in and they said that she's there with her mom at parenting class. So fingers crossed that that's a really good fit. And all the classes offer a meal. They offer them gift cards as they go through the different steps. And they offer childcare for younger siblings. So they are all set up to help, really, truly help parents.
Cool. I'm sorry, what is attendance court?
So,
that was before.
truancy court
Truancy court.
with a positive spin. We are encouraging attendance.
And doing a good job.
The numbers got really wacky on us last year. Instead of 8 court sessions, we had 6. We just simply weren't getting citations. So we ended up with about half the citations, almost exactly, that we had in previous years, and we are talking with the school about what's going on. I know that there were immigration concerns, whether we are truly helping families if we cite parents into court, and maybe put them on a radar that they weren't otherwise on. But at the same time, you can't base who you're citing on that. So you either cite everyone or you don't cite everyone. And I think that was a part of the reason why we saw such a drop-off in citations last year. They are working on that. That is their issue.
And they're doing a great job of partnering with us on that. So Kimberly and I went over with Haley to start that conversation a couple weeks ago. We're going back in a week and a half. They're very happy with the service we've provided from the city, so it's really just figuring out what the right next steps are.
Yeah. And the right process for them and the right way to identify cases that do come to court. I think in the past they were sending maybe more than they needed to, which didn't bother us. But then when they realized, okay, wait, we got to be more sensitive about who we send to court, now I think they're just reevaluating who do we send and when, what are our parameters. So we have 1 court session set up for the 13th of November. No new citations yet, just cases that were held over from last year. But that's at least our starting date, and who knows, we might get some new ones by then, but for now. But that's an ongoing conversation.
So what's different between how Milwaukie and the circuit court deal with it?
Yeah, personalities.
Oh, yeah.
Is what they have 3 different judges over there that handle it. One handles mostly, I think, like Colton and Malala and Estacada, and then the other 2 handle other North Clackamas schools, Brex Putnam and Clackamas High School, and then the other elementaries and middle schools. And my feel is it's just the personality differences, right? As to how much of a punitive process it feels like. And they really do want to make sure that it is a helpful, family-oriented process, not a, well, we need your $160 because your child didn't go to school. That's clearly not our focus, and I think they would like that to be the case in the other 2 courts.
And what was the significant change in enrollment?
Do you recall what he said the numbers? I didn't write it down, but he said that they saw a significant drop in their enrollment this year.
Really?
Overall?
That's what I recall.
So I don't remember it in our conversation, but when I spoke to them about Hillside, they saw 80 students fewer at Ardenwald than they saw last year, and 80 fewer students last year than they expected. So as much as there's this feeling that there's all of these families moving in, they're just not seeing the numbers that reflect that right now.
Yeah.
So is that partly where they're thinking that immigration policies are entering into it? Are they thinking that kids, the families are like going somewhere else or doing something else? Or is it the other way around in the immigration concerns that the kids are attending school more because they don't want to take a chance on getting in trouble or something? I mean, I don't know which way that's going, positive or negative.
Yeah, when it's yeah.
I understood that the problem hasn't changed. It's how they treat the problem that has changed. Because whereas before they wouldn't have thought twice of citing in this parent whose child isn't attending school, now they're saying, do we compound this problem because we've now put this parent on the radar and if we end up with a parent who's, involved in a deportation
Right.
process, the child's certainly not going to school.
Right.
So I don't know that the attendance problem has fluctuated. It's how do we deal with it?
I see.
And we had asked just for them to come up with a consistent policy. Our SRO officers, the person who often will deliver these notices, they're caught in an uncomfortable situation of trying to figure out when they're supposed to deliver notices and when they're not. The school wasn't necessarily talking as they were drafting those notices at the end of last year. So we just asked for the sake of clarity that they come up with a policy, they let us know how they would like to see this work, and then we would work with them in order to try and make that happen. But in terms of families, there's a migration out of Oregon City, Gladstone, and Milwaukie away from the river into areas that have fewer services for families in poverty. So Matt's seeing that. Superintendent Eiderbach has seen that when he's looking at his numbers. He expected that was going to be the case as prices rise around rent and ownership. And he's seen that play out up and down the water line.
So that's the most of what I have, I think. I did go to the judges conference. There was one in March and one in September. Of course, the new cell phone law has changed, and it doesn't affect us here, but it'll play out in appeals court at some point because, again, it's not as clear as it needs to be.
Really?
Yeah, with the distracting rabbit.
Yeah, the new law is going to cause some more questions because it's set up to be a tier. So, the first one's $260, it's a B, next one's $435, third one's a misdemeanor. So the courts are not consistent yet, and nobody's told them whether this is October going forward. So if you have 2 other citations and now you get one after October 1st, do you now have misdemeanor? Or do you just simply have a $260 B violation?
Oh, I see.
And that hasn't been decided. I haven't seen anybody come in yet that has more than one. It's of course only been one court session. But that'll have to get fleshed out. My thought is the safe route is looking at October 1st forward.
Yeah.
And so that's my plan as far as dealing with those. Obviously, I deal with whatever the officer cites. But if I have an officer who's citing in 435 and it's the first one since October 1st, I have to decide what to do with it. And I think in preserving the violation, you need to start from October 1st forward. That makes the most sense. So that'll get fleshed out in appeals court. But that was the biggest update, of course, from the judges' conference. And then, of course, the marijuana laws, though those feel old now.
Do you get many tickets under those?
Not many, but we've had a few.
Yeah. Just from like smoking in public thing?
Yeah, or an 18, 19-year-old who gets caught at school.
Okay.
We've seen a few of those. But it was a change. There's a license suspension now that wasn't there before. And there's classes to take. There's new classes out there. But I think that's all I have. Any other? Oh, and Counselor Abba, I did read your email about the liens and imposing liens and what appeared to be double imposing of liens. And I got back to Haley with my take, which was very similar to yours. So that's an ongoing conversation. All right.
Thank you for your report. Thank you. I really like the way this is put together. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
All right. We have Milwaukie Bay Park update, which is going to be introduced by you or Stephanie?
We've invited Catherine and Scott to come up. Stephanie, do you want to come up just to answer questions with the team? And is Scott coming or?
No, yeah. The agenda was 5:45.
Yeah.
We're ahead of time.
The judge was quick.
You want to sit here?
She's all organized and stuff, so
I'll do it. Yeah.
no questions to ask.
So it's in PDF format.
Okay. really slow.
Tap dance.
Because he had the first 2 slides. Just a minute. I'm going to do a full screen.
It's gonna be a little different because
It's a PDF, right? Oh,
yeah, you get rid of that.
there, yes.
And then like, and then she doesn't want you to do that very quickly.
Yeah, you're supposed to go slow.
Sorry.
Okay, so that's 2 things to get through. Okay. It wouldn't really make sense for me to skip over the first 2
You will do a
slides, so yeah, bear with me. So I'm Catherine Krieger. I'm the Planning and Development Manager for the North Clackamas Parks and Recreation District. Thank you for having us. So I know that you guys have made great strides in the development of the park. Phase 1 and Phase 2 are all done, and I know that it's part of your goals to work on to complete Phase 3. And I've been spending a lot more time out there recently just to sort of get familiar with the project, but you guys are the institutional memory, so I'm really looking forward to getting your feedback on this project approach. So, as you know, what we've been doing so far on the park is we provide maintenance on the park, and it's through an IGA, which is quite old, which we are committed.
We are very committed.
To updating this year.
Very committed.
It was made in 1992 and then amended to include the park in 2010. So, in terms of the policy related to the park, we know that you had your downtown and riverfront land use framework plan, which you recently updated to include the South Downtown Plaza. And then the Vision Action Plan has the park stated in a couple of different places. And that was a really incredible process, which you just adopted last month. And then in your stated goals, it's one of your top 3 priorities is to complete the park. And then NCPRD has been working on the park, has had this in our CIP since 2007. So it's in our CIP. It's eligible for about, I think, 83%, give or take, for SDCs eligible. And we're also updating that, so that might change in the next year or so.
What does that mean?
Well, SDCs are based on growth, as I'm sure you know. And based on the growth projection that was made in 2007, you assign a development cost to a project, and then based on the growth is the eligibility is given a percentage based on the growth. So it's actually fairly high for Milwaukie, 83%. There's some parks or areas where it's much lower. It's, 50% or 40%. And it varies based on parks, trails, natural areas. And so the type of the park makes a difference. This one happens to be called a special use park. And then we have...
Still don't really follow that.
Oops.
I don't even
So 83% of what?
So if we had, we have, for example, about $1 million. Maybe this is even my next slide. We have about $1 million in the Zone 1 that we could put toward the riverfront Milwaukie Bay Park. So if the cost of the park is $1 million, we can put $833,000 of SDCs towards the development of the park. So we would have a little gap that would need to be filled in some other way. I don't think it's really a significant issue at this point, but it's just something to note. And then also, we are updating our SDC capital improvement plan now as well.
So if the cost of the park is $3 million, which is kind of what was in our last CIP, then you could put the full $1 million in because it's not 83%.
We could actually even put in 83% of $3 million, but there would still be a gap. That would need to be filled by some other kind of funding.
Right, yeah.
Which just...
And that assumes that you have 83% of $3 million.
Right, yeah, right.
Which we're working on.
Right, which we're working on.
Does the percentage changes depending on, did you say population or?
It's on a growth projection that's made. We hire consultants to determine what the growth projection is, and this was in 2007, so I'm thinking actually it will change and may increase in the next calculation.
Okay.
And we have been discussing with both Catherine and Scott what we're currently seeing. So they know both what we have in current applications as well as what we're hearing some rumor of, so that there's a sense of these are probably real. These ones are less real, but probably on the direction you can count on 60 to 70% of these. And so we've been trying to give them a sense of, can we hit this number? And if we can, great, but we still have to come up with the other 17% from somewhere, whether that's through general operating or whether that's through a bond or a grant. And are those the dollars they want to use? So I think part of what Scott's been working on is where should the funds come from, and what's the best, most valuable place for the money to come from to get to that CIP number.
Right. So we could actually probably spend, that's probably another good session, is to just talk about SDCs in general. And we could do that if you want. So Ann just mentioned future SDCs. So yeah, you guys, Ann, actually Chuck did a projection, and it was up to in the next 3 or 4 years if everything gets built, which sometimes projects live and sometimes they die, but it was, like $260,000 to $700,000 or $800,000. So, I mean, there is a lot of growth occurring, as you know, in Milwaukie, and so that's something to take a look at.
And just so you know, those numbers were the projects that are things like railroad, where it's pretty cool, they're actually doing some amount, but it also included things like Rustboro, which we don't know. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's applications, it's far enough to be an application, but that number doesn't include things that we're hearing about or that Alma's hearing about. These are things that at least have some concrete number.
Grant awards are a possibility. We think this would be a good candidate for a grant. And we're looking at all options. And of course, we would need to take any of those options to our board for approval. But we're really sort of trying to uncover various ways that we might be able to get to the cost of the project. A comment about the cost. This cost estimate comes from your capital improvement plan. And I don't know a lot about it yet. I'm looking forward to learning more about it. I believe it's mostly it's construction costs, and so then there would be additional soft costs related to that too. So
hey, Chuck, would you like to come up and make a comment?
I knew I'd drag you into this.
After I told him I wasn't going to be up here.
He's nicer.
Basically, those costs are from the last consultant that you guys hired from DEA when they got through the 30% level on the entire project. They had proposed several costs, and what we did to come up with Phase 3 is we took their estimates minus the Phase 1 and 2 elements, and then the Phase 4, which we called it, which is the overlook and
pedestrian bridge
and the dock down, the transient dock. So those would be the Phase 4. Those aren't in the $3 million. So the $3 million is actually split out of that cost, and it's only to cover the plaza, the Great Lawn, the amphitheater, the play area, and the big restaurants.
Yeah. And those are 2000.
Those would have been 10 or 12
2000. Yeah, so we would need to escalate those. I mean, that would be what schematic design is all about, would be to test the numbers.
Hi, Scott.
Come on up, Scott.
Since I'm not Scott.
He's in person.
You do a good job.
Well, he said that you guys were all set to go and you're going to give us all the money and we're ready to go. Is that right?
100%.
We're on your favorite side.
Good. Have you already been talking? I'm sorry, I thought we were starting a little bit
Well, we got
later.
finished
You must have finished early, I apologize.
That's right.
You never know.
You're on time.
Judge was fast.
Lucky
But
it
it's not
wasn't
too
till
late
like
to-
6.
Review.
Okay. Hi, I'm Scott Archer, the from Clackamas Park and Rec District Director. Sorry I missed the first part here. I do apologize. So you hit the kind of the introductory stuff already, and I'm sure Catherine said this for us, but I wanted to restate just that the district is really excited to be working with the city on finishing Milwaukie Bay Park, and hence that's why we're here talking to you tonight, and we've been working closely with Ann and Chuck and Stefan now recently and other staff. And we're just want you to know, I want you to hear it from me, and probably, again, you may have already heard this from Catherine a little bit, but just to reemphasize that we're excited to work with the city on this. And we talked to you about that a little bit too at the other council meeting that we were at, I think this summer, a couple months ago or so. So anyway, so it looks like we're talking through the cost and funding. Have you already covered this, or should we
I did, but if you have other ideas of where we could...
Well, I think the point would be is just that we are very actively identifying funding funding solutions. We have some ideas, and we have some funds that are already basically dedicated. For example, the SDCs in Zone 1 are to be used in Zone 1. That's Milwaukie, and we by just way of our own staff recommendations and board actions, we can direct those to the projects that are in our capital plans, and conversely, this is in your capital plan, obviously. So we've got SDCs, we got future SDCs that we've talked about. Did you already go through that part? So I won't repeat all that. I do want to talk. I guess I'll talk just a little bit about the potential for a general obligation bond. We have been discussing that. This wouldn't just be a GO bond that would only be for the city of Milwaukie. It would be a district bond, of course, because we are a district. However, we would identify projects within each of the areas of the district, each of the zones, and I'm pretty sure that the public sentiment and the city's recommendation, and probably the district's, would be to make sure that we've got the Milwaukie Bay Park project identified as one of those projects, should we go forward with that. So, and then other options that there's some other budgetary options. We're not quite ready to say exactly what that is, but we're looking at the possibility of some other funds that we might have available that would take some budgetary action, and we would potentially have some other funds available. And I think the grants item that's on this PowerPoint this project is, I think, a very attractive project for the granting agencies that we've worked with traditionally. The Land and Water Conservation Fund, the local government grant program through the state, which are the lottery funds. This is an attractive project for grants. So I think we'd have a really good opportunity for some grant funding with this one, especially with the other funds that we're already identifying, partnership with the community and the city and all that. So we're excited about that. So.
Can I ask, what do you mean when you say that you're looking at other funding sources, but it would require budgetary action? That seems kind of vague to me, trying to figure out what that means.
So,
specifically,
for example, we have an example of that might be general fund money from the district that goes into some of our funds, projects or whatever that could be potentially, and everything I'm talking about here on this particular
qualifiers on
qualifier, you got it. Okay, good. So I want to make sure that was good. But
he's nervous because he hasn't talked to his council.
Yeah.
So
yes, we have to be a little bit careful. Yeah.
That they would have to.
Everything is subject to words, but what I'm talking about is.
Hold you to it. Speak up, though, please.
This is off, right? That is a great question. So, as you know, the city council and your budget that you all do and so forth, you can redirect funds. You can say this is our priority and we want to redirect. Sometimes that comes from the elected officials. Sometimes staff will make a recommendation that we've identified something that we want to pursue here, and we'll ask for that kind of action. And that might be just a redirecting of general funds into some of the programs that we operate. And so that could be, there's two things with that. One is that it could be, if it's in the current budget, for example, right now we're in our fiscal year that goes through the end of June of 18. If we wanted to do that, we would have to go back and have a supplemental budget action. I know that you guys know all about that. And then going forward, if we were going to look at future budget years, we would just propose that in our budget and make recommendations to our budget committee and to our board ultimately. So is that good enough? Yeah. So we're looking at those types of opportunities and seeing what we can do to, you start adding some things up, and pretty soon we're cobbling together a pretty good chunk of money towards what we think it might take to do this, or what at least preliminarily has been identified. Although Catherine's going to get a little bit more into that. What does that $3 million mean to us, and how are we going to deal with it?
And as far as the potential grants, and you said it's an attractive project for those type of funds, what's the timeline on when we would, how does that process work from a timeline standpoint?
A lot of those, the big two, actually the biggest one is the local government grant program, which again is that's the lottery money that's dedicated for parks, that is in a competitive grant process that's administered by state Parks and Rec every year. You have to submit by April-ish, May, maybe a letter of intent, and then an application in the spring, and then they meet. Usually go do a presentation to a granting board that's been appointed, and that would be awarded in the summer. So if we were looking at something for this coming year, we'd be wanting to have that ready to go by April or May.
But
I think
we also talked about the fact that we wanted to try and get the schematic designs for whatever changes before we went into the application. It looks better. It also gives us a sense for how many SDCs have come in, which then allows us better leverage going in. So we may not actually look at doing that this year. What we would be looking for this year is the planning money to come out of NCPRD to be invested into that schematic design, and then next year we would apply for the grant. Is that fair?
That's very, very good. Yeah. So it's every year. So that same cycle is every year.
And is that the funding that's funding Wichita Park? Is that the same grant?
That's a land and water conservation fund. That's also administered by state parks. Also works on a similar timeline. Land and water conservation is federal funding that gets passed through to each state, and in our state it gets administered by state parks. That one usually has quite a bit less money available, and it tends to be more competitive because you're trying to get money from a smaller pool. We have been successful in that one. Wichita is what that one is from. I would probably first look at the local government grant, the state lottery money, but that's always a possibility as well. And it also depends on which. With each project, you're going to look at the criteria of the grant, and you kind of evaluate that, and you go in saying, well, this project lines up a little bit better with this grant, and this one lines up a little bit better with that grant. So you kind of evaluate and go in with that. And then there are also other granting opportunities, like through Metro. We've got green space money to look at, and we'd be identifying all those things. And the Park District has been, and I've only been with the district for about a year and a half, so I can't take great credit for this, but historically, the Park District has been quite successful with grant applications. We've done well, and we know how the programs work, and we've got a pretty good track record. There's no guarantees on that, but I think this project has a lot of grant potential, and so you use that again with your matching money that you've already put up. We've got cash that we're already talking about putting up. Good opportunity there.
And the general obligation bond, that's not the kind of bond that has to go to voters?
That is.
It is.
Yeah.
Okay.
That is the voter-approved bond,
Okay.
yeah. So we're talking, and again, everything that not everything, but a lot of what I'm talking about with some of these decisions are the board still has to make decisions around those things. But these are things that we're exploring. And so yeah, the GO bond is the voter approved bond.
So they're exploring that instead of going back for an increase in your base the way they did a few years ago?
I wouldn't say one is ruling out the other one. We're exploring all options.
Okay.
Yeah, and that might fall under what you just said. The latter part would probably fall under looking at all options
Okay.
of any funding opportunities. And again, just I'm going to reiterate it, but we really we really want to help get this project done. It's important to the community, which means it's important to the city, but it's also important to the district. It's one of our targeted projects, and I know Catherine's going to talk about that a little bit more in some specifics here. So maybe that's a good segue to move forward a little bit here.
Yeah.
And you've already, the introduction's already been on. This is the part of the thing where this is my slide, and then I was going to say, Catherine Krieger is going to walk you through the project approach. So we're going to get a little bit more into the project approach in these next few slides here.
Yeah, so the project approach is for your consideration. The big picture is that we would hire a consultant for schematic design with potential that that consultant and engineers, design and engineers, could complete the project. So we'd want to have that option available to us and then move into construction, assuming funding is available. So I know in the July meeting, your staff took you through a number of these design considerations, but this is kind of a first blush that I wanted to just sort of reiterate, get your reaction to. A lot of the things that you talked about in July are listed here in one way or another. So what I did is, in my investigations, went back to the Planning Commission land use reviews. There were a number of permit applications with the master plan, and then there were a number of conditions of approval. So, and a number of these conditions of approval came from the Design and Landmarks Committee. So they approved the project with some considerations, and then the Planning Commission accepted those considerations. So I'll just walk through those. So one, not a very big item, was, and this isn't all of them, this sort of highlights stormwater at the restroom and how it landed in a pedestrian way. There was a comment about the water feature should echo the diverse nature of waterways through Milwaukie and the site, and to include a less linear water feature. Also, there was a comment about incorporating Milwaukee's character and history in the details of the project. And this might be, it was stated, art elements, the more vernacular architecture, signage, or choice of materials. There was a request to reduce the distance from the restroom to the play area, design for views from downtown and outside parks, as well as views from within the park. And then reduce the cold feeling of concrete throughout and on the buildings. Those were primarily the design review comments. And then there was a requirement to include a dedicated non-motorized boat launch area. And if it could not be permitted by some agency like Department of State Lands, for example, we would have to submit a narrative saying why it was not possible. And then it also required the removal of the pedestrian bridge over Kellogg Creek. Any thoughts or questions on those? And then I know in your vision plan, there was a stated goal for year-round programming. And so one of the things that we would do in schematic design is take a look at active and passive programming. So the active programming would be the things that you can imagine, concerts. Stefan went down and did a sound test on the waterfront and declared it suitable. And
the music was a little. Thank you for doing
that. That happens sometimes.
And we'd also, since the master plan was done, you've also adopted the South Downtown Plaza. So we would want to take a look at, are there programming things that might be different from one than the other? I mean, obviously we would suggest and want to design for flexibility, but there may be some things that are more appropriate in that future plaza than in the amphitheater that's being shown in the master plan. And then there's passive programming, which is really great because that's what keeps the park safe and active and provides an amenity at all times for the community. So like an interactive fountain, we talked about that a little bit at the last meeting, having a more interactive fountain. We know that the water is going to attract people, and so we want to have people enjoy it safely and in a fun way. So I think we would take a really close look at the fountain and how it's designed so that it can be more interactive. And then there's potential other interactive features that could be passive, whether it's in the play area or other areas in the park. And then some other considerations. I've heard that the cedar tree needs to remain, and that seems like a great idea, reasonable idea. We want to make sure the pedestrian and bike connections are continuous. Right now there's some gaps as you hit the parking area and go over to, what's the park? Scott Creek Park? The park just to the
So as you go
south.
by the Calvin Plain.
Yeah, the West Park, where there was recently there was a neighborhood event there. I saw you that. And then, of course, we also want to take into account maintenance. We know this is a 50, 100-year project, so we want to make sure that it always looks good. And then in this phase of schematic design, we need to develop, the cost and the budget for the project. So I took a look at a schedule. I'm not committing to this schedule, but some of the issues around it are, we know that there's the joint permit that expires. It's the Army Corps of Engineers and NIPS and Department of State Lands that expires actually on Halloween in 2020. So I just started working backward to see if there was a reasonable way to get there. So with construction complete at approximately October 2020, there are reasonable periods that are outlined here: the construction, the bidding, the permitting, construction documents, and schematic design. The things that we need to think about as we develop a real schedule would be when is the funding in place? What kind of community outreach do we want to have? There may be things that the community wants, we want, that aren't in the joint permit, so there might be a track that separates off of that and goes for another joint permit. And then there may be other pieces that we're trying to complete during that time. We know we need to go back to the Design and Landmarks Committee. That was stated in the Planning Commission approval. And then we have to think about the in-water work. There are certain months of the year when you can work in the Willamette River. And then that would be for the stone steps that are shown in the master plan, but also if there's a boat launch that may trigger a new permit. So the way we're thinking about the community outreach is broad, as you might imagine. It's an exciting project. It's a park for a lot of people. We would want to engage the PARB, your Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, the neighborhood district associations, the Downtown Business Association, light watercraft enthusiasts, boaters, bicycles, pedestrians, and other ways to engage and touch the water, maybe swimmers even. So this is the project organization, starting at the bottom with the community that I just mentioned. We may have different ways of reaching out to the community, whether it's public open houses. There might be some opportunities for some web-based surveys. We get a lot of great information that way very quickly through social media. And we could, test different types of play areas and that kind of thing. I have heard that there is a desire for a nature play down there, and we'd want to make sure that's something that everybody's interested in, or there's other sort of ways to augment that. It doesn't have to necessarily be just one or another. And then that information would feed into a technical advisory committee. We're thinking that that would have a landscape architect, an urban designer, a civil engineer, and be made up of both community and staff members from both the city and from NCPRD. And then we've been
already, just as a heads up, so we already have some members from like the park and other groups that would be interested in serving on that, which is great. So that's where we would end up working with those individuals even beyond our monthly updates with the park.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, so we have been meeting monthly, regularly, and so we would propose an executive committee, or we could call it something else, which would be made up of Ann and Stefan, and or his position, and then also Chuck, and then Scott, our director, and myself. And then, of course, the executive committee would report back to both the city council and the NCPRD board of directors. So the next steps, if this is something you'd like to consider, are digging more into the project history. We've got a little bit of a learning curve to get up to speed on the project. Would be also to solicit for design and engineering services, to form the TAC, and to start creating a community outreach plan and how we want to do that, and then forming a scope schedule of the budget. And then we're proposing creating a project IGA for this specific project until we can get the larger IGA completed. So that's the outline.
Can I add one piece?
What?
I'm going to add one piece.
Sure.
Please do.
So Scott, during his last budget cycle, actually thought ahead and had some cash already allocated towards this planning effort. So I believe you have $60,000 that was allocated.
Right.
When we were talking about the percentage requirement based on what we expect the budget would be, they're a little short, but not huge amounts, 20, 30,000 short for the first phase. So we talked about going back to the board or finding a way to do some of that out of operating. But I bring this up because the selection will go through NCPRD. It's their funding, but we will serve as members of the selection process.
Okay. And I'm confident that that amount to cover the difference, that it's probably going to cost more than the 60, but that was just kind of, we had to put a number in to get this on the board, so to speak, and be where we're at now. And I think we'll make some adjustments if we need to. So I'm not concerned about that part now.
Questions?
So what next?
Well, I think the specific next step would be to get working on a request for qualifications. So we've talked to our procurement people. That's what they've suggested we do, is do a request for qualifications, especially because if we want to keep the potential to hire the team through the end of the project. So I think that's really the first next step, and also to start outlining the scope, schedule, budget, and working on an IGA.
And as Ann just said, we have already expressed we're willing to take the lead on that. And since it is our funding, it makes it less complicated. And so we're right there. And we were just kind of waiting to talk with you and make sure there weren't any concerns about the process or any other issues before we kind of push the button to start that ball rolling. And we're right there. So we're ready to get going on the procurement, and then all these other things we'll be working on putting into place the different advisory pieces and all the other stuff that we're going to work on. So we're ready to move it forward. And then meanwhile, again, the budget stuff, we're just gonna continue to work on that and put a package together. Part of that is that we're aiming for a target based on some information that is going to be reviewed and possibly refined, or likely somewhat refined, or whatever. So the budget number has the potential to move, and we're going to be, and that's where that listing all of the different potential funding options comes into play. If it slides to the significantly more expensive part, then that's where we'd have to get even more creative, because at the $3 million price tag that we've been talking around, we feel pretty reasonably good about the ability to put together some enough of a funding package that I think we're going to either be there or very close to there. But again, this is subject to some, that budget's subject to some review, and we'll see how that looks.
Right.
That was a 2010 estimate.
Yeah, I was going to say 2010, 2012.
Prices and costs have certainly gone up since then.
Just off the top of your head, percentage between those.
Do you want
I'm sorry, the
2010 and now. What would,
I would,
take a wag at it? Yeah.
we're seeing pretty big bumps in other projects.
Yeah.
So
contractors are in high demand, and they're busy. And
it depends on what the bidding climate will be later. I don't know.
If it dips a little bit or something, we might. But that's a tough one to estimate. But
30%.
That's probably a fair estimate.
Yeah. So.
And then the issue of the boat launch is just sort of what's in the scope. The boat launch could be any number of things. So we really have to work through that.
We also, we've been having, and Wilbit can probably lead this part of the conversation, but NCPRD with her board that she was chairing had talked about SDCs and the values of those within the city. So we're also basing those on current SDC rates. You may or may not choose to keep those SDC rates, and if those fluctuated or changed, that would also change the outcome for these projects.
Yeah.
So Scott and I have talked about having them come back in the next 6 months to have that discussion with this group, and that would give you a better sense for what would be generated.
Yeah. By then, I would think that we'd have that pretty well nailed.
Yeah, we'll have a pretty good idea then. Yeah, we had begun our review of our SDC rates and our policies and our ordinances, and then we stopped for a little bit while we've sorted out the stuff with Happy Valley, because we're going to have to carve out part of the district and then refocus the capital planning around a different boundary. We're at the point now where we're moving forward again, so we're reactivating, and Wilda is part of that task force, the DAB, which is going to continue to be the Citizens Advisory Committee. Our board just sort of reaffirmed that at their last meeting. So yeah, we'll be talking to you about potentially changes in SDC rates, and we'll have conversations with you.
So regarding Happy Valley, with the lawsuit, the press release that the county put out said that would significantly burden those that are not in Happy Valley if successful. So how will this play out if they were successful to Milwaukie Bay?
If the
city of Happy Valley
if the city's
lawsuit, how does this affect what we're talking about?
There's things I can and can't discuss publicly, but a lot of what is being requested is in SDCs that are in a zone that we wouldn't be able to spend here anyway. There are other nuances to some of that could be don't exactly fit in that answer, but I would say the majority of that ask is in funds that are in Zone 3, which is the east side of 205, which includes Happy Valley, but also the unincorporated area on the east side, and those can't be spent in Milwaukie anyway. So hopefully that gives you most of the answer to your question. And then just generally as well, since you asked about that, we're not on that topic, but just a quick comment about that. We will do our best to keep you all informed, and we communicate regularly with your staff, with Ann and your staff, about that situation. But we've made this statement before, and I think it just bears repeating that. From everything that we've evaluated and analyzed, we do not expect to change our levels of service to the rest of the district because Happy Valley is exiting. So at a minimum, we're not going to go backwards. And then of course, we're talking about the potential for future additional funding and possible changes to that structure and so forth. But we remain confident that However, now there's the settlement part of the funding, but then there's the ongoing permanent tax rate. There is going to be a loss of some tax dollars, but there's also going to be a reduction of service levels that in that particular area. So we're comfortable that we're not going to change our levels of service to the district. We'll still have a very a substantial district. We have over 100,000 people still, even without the city of Happy Valley. That's a large district. It's the second largest park district in the state of Oregon. So we're a substantial. We have good scales of economy still, and we still have a lot. We have. We're still very much a going concern, and that wasn't particularly what you were asking, but I just want to reiterate that should there be any perception otherwise.
So I think it's good that you said the first step is the RFQ, and then getting the budget and stuff. I saw, I think the public outreach piece of it probably does need to wait until that stuff is on board, because, we tap our public for, we're going to be tapping them for our comp plan and the library and other things, and we ought to just have our, get a little bit more stuff done before we start engaging our geese in the row.
Our geese. Especially when it comes to park things.
We agree with that.
We would put it in the scope of work for the consultant, so the idea is to have what a plan is, or at least an outline of the plan, so we can budget for it. But I understand.
And Stefan had an addition.
It's kind of a wrap-up thought, but it goes back to Catherine's slide that just showed the schedule. That may seem to a lot of people like, oh, you've got 3 years. What's the worry? But having been involved in some big projects with in-water work, if you miss one of those deadlines and you get pushed out a year, you're in real trouble. And so it'll be critical to keep this thing on task. And, I'll be out there in the public soon cheering for it. And I think moving forward with the RFQ for consultant help is critical right now, as soon as possible.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, sounds like a good plan to get us where the community wants us to be. Where we want to be.
Yeah. Again, we just want to finish with that. We're really excited to work with the city on this. We know this has been very important for your community, for your citizens, for the council now. You've reaffirmed that with your goals, and it's been on our capital list for many years, and we'd love to help see this through. And we plan to do that, unless you tell us you don't want us to work with you. But we're excited to work with you. So,
and that wouldn't be consistent with our making it a good council goal, would it?
No, it wouldn't be consistent with our vision plan or anything else, would it? Or relationship.
You may have already said this before I showed up, Ann, but we're available to come back and provide updates or just talk about this at any future work session, council meeting, what have you. So we're just open and available. We're meeting already with staff regularly, but I think we were talking about doing this at a kind of on a regular basis to update. So as appropriate, just let us know and we'll be back. Happy to talk to you.
Good.
Great, thanks.
Thank you
so much.
Thanks for inviting us.
I apologize again that I was late.
You were not late.
You all were a little early. I should have been earlier than I was. Thank you.
Yeah. We have to go into executive session.
Can I just mention something for a minute or less?
We generally don't in study sessions.